Hello and welcome to episode 157 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're talking about the second minor of the 2025 Call of Duty League season. What a minor it was. Some surprises. Just as we talked about, we said on the last pod that it looked like it was going to be pretty chalk, or that it might be, and it did not turn out to be that way at all. We had a very surprising runner-up. Got an upset, another Atlanta FaZe upset on the losing end for FaZe. But we got, I think, the winner that, not out of left field at all, but a very entertaining grand finals nonetheless. And we'll break that all down. But before we get to that, how are you doing, Big?
Doing all right. Like you said, it was a pretty exciting minor overall. Today in particular was... well, not to spoil too much, but it was two not so close matches and then a banger final. That second, I guess, depending on how how strict you want to be with considering minors and majors and diversifying how you classify them. Two finals in a row, technically, that went all the way to a game 7 when I can't think of very many beforehand in the best of 7 era that have actually gone to game 7. So it was pretty exciting, all things considered, and we definitely got a bunch to talk about.
Yeah, let's start at the very top, that grand final. The Los Angeles Thieves end up winning this series and the tournament as a whole by beating the Vancouver Surge 4-3 in the grand finals. They win the game 7. Of course, the first minor of the season was a 5-game series. Before minor 2, the CDO announced that they were increasing or expanding the finals to a best of 7, which turned out to be an excellent idea because we got, like you mentioned, we saw a banger grand finals major 1, and then we see another great grand finals in minor 2, both going to game 7. The last game, game 7, was Skyline S&D. LAT go down 3-1. They win 5 straight rounds in search, and pretty much put the game away, put the series away, and exercise some of their demons. They only got to play one series at the minor last time around. Of course, they lose that game 7 in the grand finals to FaZe in the first major, and then minor 2 they come out and they beat Vancouver, who I don't want to say that no one expected them to get here, because that would it's not entirely accurate. I think a lot of people, considering how well they played over the last few weeks since their roster change, I think people expected them to, be kind of I don't know, like a bracket buster, so to speak, that they had a lot of chances, especially because there was going to most likely be a setup with them and FaZe in that next round, and they had just beaten FaZe. But I want to focus more on LAT at the moment. What did you think of this series and LAT managing to not only come back from a deficit in that last game, but also to win the last 2 maps in total? They were facing a match loss. They were down 3-2 in the series, and then they win those last 2 maps.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it as LAT focused as possible here, and we can obviously talk about Vancouver later, but from just the LAT perspective, I mean, Scrap said it in the post-game interview. He called it a dirty Neslo because, I guess the Neslo's got to stick to a 2-3-5, and this is a little expanded on that, but I thought that was funny. The big thing overall is this was obviously Skyline Search in particular is the last map that LA Thieves lost to FaZe in the grand finals at Major 1. So it's once again game 7 with LA Thieves playing it, and they come away with the win this time. Obviously, it doesn't go to round 11 again, but they were able to win this, and they did, like you said, a little bit of a comeback with Vancouver having a 3-1 lead in game 7, and then LAT rattle off 5 rounds in a row. In particular, the round 8, where LA Thieves were up 4-3, they were in a 2v4 situation, and then I can't remember who. I'm pretty sure Ghosty was one of the players last live, but they somehow go from a 2v4 disadvantage to a 2v2, and then it comes down to a 1v1. I think it was Ghosty against Nasty, and Ghosty gets the final kill, and that was really the decider for me, because obviously Vancouver, they're up 4v2 advantage. If they clutch that round up, it's 4-4. Anything can really happen from that point, but then you get that 5-3 lead. You know, it's not comfortable, because there have been plenty of memes and stuff like that about choking 5-3 leads recently, but nonetheless, I mean, 5-3 is definitely a better position to be in than 4-4. So that was really the decider for me in that map alone. Looking at the series overall, though, and getting back to that, like, quote unquote dirty Neslo, as Scrap called it, is LA Thieves didn't win a hard point in this, and I can talk more about that when we want to focus on Vancouver. But I mean, it's hard to not tie it into them. LA Thieves at this point, I think they said on stream, in the post match interview, I think either Nameless or Puckett said it. I don't know what timeline they were looking at. It might have been just the minor and major 2 qualifiers. But I believe they said that heading into the grand finals, LA Thieves were 9-1 in hardpoint, and Vancouver were 8-2. So if that's just, I mean, it has to be just like the minor up to the finals and the major 2 qualifiers, if I had to guess. But regardless of the exact breakdown and all that, like, LA Thieves have looked like one of the best hardpoint teams all year, outside of like that little blip period where they, you know, after the holiday break, they just weren't playing well in general. But yeah, we look back at the grand finals against FaZe at Major 1, and LA Thieves were winning the hard points but losing the search. And now we get to this finals here, and they don't win a hard point, but they're able to actually take the best of 7. And I think Scrap said he was happy they were able to show off some of their improvements in S&D, and that's got to be a scary thought for the rest of the league. And even, you know, if you're Atlanta FaZe thinking about like a rematch with LA Thieves, if they weren't able to beat LA Thieves in a hard point, and now LA Thieves are improving in Surge, which was the mode FaZe were able to capitalize on, what does a future LA Thieves versus FaZe matchup look like, especially in a best of 7 if we see them in the finals again? So overall for Thieves, a pretty strong performance. I do think, you know, it is interesting to think about them not winning a hard point in the finals. But they did control. They literally won both controls in the best of 7 3-0. So they didn't drop a control around in the grand finals. And they didn't go flawless in the search, because Vancouver did win the game 5 search. But they were able to win 2 of the 3 searches in a best of 7. So, you know, just from an LA Thieves perspective, Vancouver's been absolutely frying. And again, not trying to jump the gun a little bit, but I mean, Vancouver still, that's their first loss with Neptune, and they haven't lost a best of 5 with Neptune yet. So their only loss is this best of 7. Vancouver's been on fire, and LA Thieves especially. I mean, Vancouver beat FaZe in this minor and previously in their first match with Neptune. So, you know, maybe we're starting to see the rise of Vancouver being legit. It's still a little early in my eyes, just because it's online and we haven't seen these guys on land. So we'll have to wait and see in that regard. But, you know, based on the sample size we have, Vancouver is playing pretty good COD heading into the finals, and LA Thieves were able to beat them and hand them their first loss with Neptune. So, you know, really encouraging performances from both teams that we see in the finals, but LA Thieves just, you know, come away with the win in the end.
Yeah, I think it's really surprising. Not that Vancouver was here, but the fight that they gave LAT was kind of surprising, because if you look at the Thieves' recent matches, before, you know, in this minor, they beat C9 3-1, they beat Carolina 3-0. And of course, we've talked about how they've had Carolina's number this year, and it really hasn't been very close. But even before that, LAT beat Toronto 3-0, they beat Vegas 3-1, they beat Carolina 3-0 again. Since the Major 1 Grand Finals, of course, where they lost 3-4 to Atlanta FaZe, nobody had even taken 2 maps off of them in a single series. Of course, this is expanded, so you would expect, you know, maybe for a team to take more than 1 map in a best of 7. But this was, you know, a really, really tight series. Probably not as close as the FaZe LAT series from Major 1. But certainly a really, really tight competitive match between, it seemed like, two evenly matched teams. And that's really surprising to see Vancouver already there. Of course, we expect LAT to be here before the season. We talked about how this is possibly the most talented Call of Duty team of all time. If you want to say that, I there's obviously going to be pushback, but you can make an argument for that. And they played incredibly well all season long. But Vancouver really just seemed to have their number. And I was looking at the stats. I couldn't find exactly the numbers that you were talking about or the broadcast was talking about. But if you include, this is before the minor 2 grand finals, but if you include major 2 qualifiers and the first few matches of minor 2, LAT was 6-1 at Hardpoint, 4-1 in Surge, and 5-0 in Control. So they were 11-1 in Respawn, 6-1 in Hardpoint. That's a really good number. Vancouver was 8-3 in Hardpoint, 6-2 in Surge, and 4-2 in Control. But the surprise is that Vancouver was able to, like you said, to win these hard points over LAT, to shut them out on hard point. And they had LAT really had to clutch up in those S&Ds and Control to win that round 11 in the first S&D of this series. That's pretty much a game changer in this series. If LAT doesn't win that, there's a very real possibility that they don't even get to a game 7, and they might lose in 5 games, 6 games, and that would have been a stunner for the Surge to pull that off. But I don't really think we were that far away from that becoming a reality. But yeah, LAT, I mean, this is just the team that we thought they would be and knew they could be, and I think they could even get better. I don't think that they're nearly at the point where they're like reaching their ceiling. Of course, that can always change. We've seen that before with LAT rosters in the past, where we thought they had a ton of talent and they just couldn't put it all together, or they kind of, trailed off during the season. We've seen that with OpTic Texas so far this season, where they have the talent on paper. It seems like they should be able to compete at the very top, but they are not putting it together right now. Right now, we're seeing LAT compete with FaZe, I think, for being the best team. If you want to say LAT is better than FaZe, I think that's, you can make that argument. I'd still go with FaZe just because we've seen it on LAN. But I mean, this is a really big step, especially if Vancouver is going to have Atlanta FaZe's number. I think that's a really big part of this equation. If LAT can kind of avoid playing FaZe as many times as possible, and they play Vancouver instead, I think that's a win for LAT in the general sense. Any kind of overall lasting thoughts on LAT before we move on and we talk more about Vancouver?
I just want to, I'm not ready to say LA Thieves have hit final form, because I do think, they're, like you said, wherever you stand in the talent debate of this roster versus other rosters, that's irrelevant at this point. Because I mean, they've been a team for 2.5, 3 months at this point, so still a lot of time left. But I do think, especially around the holiday break and the minor 1 stuff where they didn't play well at minor 1. They only had that 1 series, I believe, and I think it was against FaZe. But regardless, they had that little bit of a blip early in the season around that holiday break, and some other people in the community and whatnot were probably a little more worried about the team. And I think this just shows that whatever quote unquote excuses were being said about lack of practice, Hydra having the visa issues, etc. That, I think that shows there was some stuff going on early in the season outside of the game that affected the performance in game, and now we're starting to see what this team is capable of. And I do think there were moments this week. I know Hydra has been a talking point in the community, leading up to this minor, of him not playing as well as he did in previous years and whatnot. And I'm not saying he's MVP Hydra just based on 1 minor, but there were moments this weekend where just the way he was moving on the map, he was getting 2-3 pieces, just there were moments where I was seeing it, like it was like a glimpse, and it's like, okay, this is the Hydra we've seen before, and like he starts doing that consistently. Not saying he hasn't been recently, but if he hits that MVP form that we know he's capable of, like this team just gets that much scarier, and they're already, I think he played well this weekend, all things considered, at the minor. But like if he's hitting that MVP form and just the rest of the team around him is elevated as well, like this is just a dangerous team.
Yeah, and I think people tend to forget, when guys go through a rough stretch, then, it's more like, okay, maybe that's in the past and they're not able to get back up there. But, I think everybody knows that Hydra is one of the most talented players ever. And, if he can be at that top form, they are almost unbeatable. I don't want to say they are, because if FaZe kind of hits peak and like Simp is doing what he usually does, then it's it's like a Avengers Civil War. You don't really know who to root for in that kind of scenario. But yeah, I was looking at the schedule, or like the past results for LAT, and they're 1-3 against Atlanta FaZe this season. They beat them in one of the first matches of the season. That was before the holiday break. They beat FaZe 3-2, and since then they've lost the 3 series. They lost in, of course, Minor 1. They lost 3-1, and then they lost twice at Minor, or at Major 1. They lost Game 5 in the winners finals, and then I believe it was winners finals, and then the grand finals. Obviously, they lose 4-3. Fortunately, they didn't have to play FaZe this weekend, because the Vancouver Surge are, I guess, the FaZe boogeyman. Used to be Nick Classic, used to be holding that mantle, but I guess maybe it's lingering still in the Surge hallways or something. I don't know, but yeah, they beat Vancouver beats FaZe for the second time in 2 weeks, I believe it was. I think it was like early last week, or something like that. It's
the first match of the major 2 qualifiers.
Yeah, I should just look it up. So that match was February 14th. So yeah, about 2 weeks removed, and that's just surprising. FaZe has pretty much dominated, especially since the holiday break. They haven't had too many hiccups, and Vancouver has now. I don't even know if you can consider it a hiccup, because you were talking about how like your prediction, I don't think it was wrong. I agreed with you, where you said like FaZe is probably going to say, okay, you got us once, but you're not going to get us again. And by golly, they got him again. And they beat them. Vancouver beats FaZe 3-2 in the series. And just I don't know, like I was skeptical, because Vancouver is Vancouver, and I had already seen them beat, and I was like, oh, okay, like still Atlanta is Atlanta, and I'm not going to pick against them for any reason. And it's probably it was close. I'm not like it didn't even get to 250 in the hard point, which you don't really see that as often as you used to. And then there's a round 11 in that S&D where Vancouver wins that, and they tie the series. Atlanta goes up 2-1 in the series, but then they drop hard point, which you can go back to. Vancouver's hard point has been very good, even though they lost the opening hard point of this series, and then they finish it off in Search and Destroy. I'm just really surprised about how quickly the Surge have put it together. I don't know if this is just a really great honeymoon period, or if this is legitimately like we talked about at the beginning of the season, like a comeback player of the year. Like there's nobody in contention for this award other than NEPTUNE. Like NEPTUNE, like I'm not even joking. Like obviously things have to continue, right? This can't just be a blip. But if Vancouver is able to be like a top 3 seed at the end of the season, and it's going to be mostly because of his arrival, and therefore he's got to be in the MVP conversation at that point. I'm not saying like we can't extrapolate these past 2 weeks and say that this is just going to be how Vancouver is the rest of the season. But in these 2 weeks, he has been a revelation, basically. And this team has, I shouldn't just say, okay, it's just him and everybody else has been playing the exact same. But this team has been a revelation since his arrival. And that was not the case. They were not anything special before he got to the team. And I want to see if you agree about, if he is able to continue to do this and Vancouver is able to be competitive with the very best teams, like he's got to be a front runner for MVP if he continues to do that.
I just put it in the notes because I saw it earlier and I don't think I put it anywhere else. I put it by the Atlanta Vancouver match, but Easy Mac tweeted out a like statistical breakdown of Vancouver with Hicksy and since NEPTUNE has replaced them, and just the numbers on this are like, they were 6-8 in hardpoint in the or what, so they were 7-11 in hardpoint, including major one qualifiers, minor one, and major one itself, and they're 7-3. I think this was before matches started today. So they picked up at least 3 hardpoint wins, so potentially 10-3 with NEPTUNE in hardpoint itself. The Search, they were 6-9 in the major one cycle, 5-2 heading into today. So that's a little, a couple. They would have 2-2 in Search today, I think, because of the 3-0 over Toronto. But regardless, anybody, Easy Mac, his Twitter is at its_Easy Mac. He used to be an analyst for FaZe, does stuff for Breaking Point and all that stuff. He's got all the numbers laid out in a beautiful spreadsheet on Twitter that he tweeted earlier today. You guys can go check that out if you want to see it yourself. But I think that's really like, it obviously wouldn't include the matches from today because he tweeted it, before the matches started. But nonetheless, it does show a good picture of just like from a raw statistical standpoint, the impact that NEPTUNE has had and the difference it's made in this team since he actually joined. And I think, for people who have watched this Vancouver team play since NEPTUNE has joined the team, it's really night and day, just the difference. Like, he obviously, I said this in one of the episodes since we've talked about Vancouver with NEPTUNE, like, yes, he has been playing very well, but it just feels like he has, unlocked something in the rest of the players too. And Nasty in particular, this is the second time Nasty has played really well against Atlanta. And I just tried to, while you were just talking, I tried to find it. I think it was the post-match interview after this Atlanta match, but I couldn't find the tweet. But they were, the desk was talking to Nasty, and he basically said, like, he feels like he thrives when he's playing against a team that's very well structured. And so that's why I'm pretty sure it was after the FaZe match. And he was just talking about, like, being, I interpreted as like, FaZe is a really good team. They play the game fundamentally sound. And Nasty feels that he plays better against teams that play the way that you would expect them to play, or saying it out loud right now doesn't make the most sense to me, but like in my mind it makes sense what he's saying in the sense that they're
more predictable because but
it's not predictable. It's just, I guess in a sense it is. Like, that makes it sound like FaZe sucks, but like I took it as like when you play some of the lower ranked teams, they might do some weird shit that you're just not expecting at all.
They make the right plays so that kind of what they're going to do as a result. It's just hard to beat them still.
Yes. So however he phrased it or whatever, that was the gist of it. And I think that's, that is an interesting point to just think about. Like, when you think about even Nasty at the end of last year, like, he was a part of that LA Thieves team that kind of struggled early on, but then as we got to the bigger tournaments later in the year, they're playing more of the better teams on a consistent basis at Champs and at EWC when they're making their run to the finals. Maybe that just, that's an interesting thing to tie together for Nasty from his perspective. And, going forward, I will be looking to see, maybe he just does play better against the better teams. And I think that's something that would bode well for him, like, going forward in his career, because, I mean, not throwing a shot at Falcons, but if I was a GM for a team here, I don't really care how good somebody plays against the Falcons. If I'm trying to form a team and I can't pick up, the guys on those top teams, I want to pick up somebody who plays well against the top teams, and that could bode well for Nasty and his longevity in the CDL. But I think, overall, for this Vancouver team, like you said, and like we were talking in the LA Thieves series, the hard point in particular has been really impressive. They winning both hard points against Thieves in the finals is definitely something to take home. Like, the second hard point was an interesting one. The Scump in particular, I was watching the Scump watch party during the finals. Like, he was mind blown at one of the spawns for the final hard point there on P4 on Vault. Then they went back and watched it afterwards, and he was kind of like breaking it down. Easy Mac had a tweet about it, and Gunless was responding it too. Like if you slow it down and look at the map, like it made a little more sense why I think it was NEPTUNE who spawned like behind the hill, even though LA Thieves had a player in it, and like just based on where other people died and were on the map, like the back of the spawn was like kind of the only one that was open. It was still a really weird spawn that really like it changed the game because NEPTUNE was able to go in. LA Thieves clearly weren't expecting him to be back there. And then Vancouver just held down that hill and won the game off that. But they were down. It was like a 200 to 190-ish game or something like that at that point, and they still had to hold the hill down for almost a full 60 to close it out. But outside of that scenario, like this NEPTUNE has really unlocked Vancouver's hard point, and he's playing well. He's playing like one of the best SNGs in the game. That can't even be debated in my eyes. And it's even he's just us against FaZe. Nasty is playing well. That has to like NEPTUNE is still playing well, so that's contributing to it. I feel like just NEPTUNE freeing up the map and taking up space allows like guys like Nasty to do what he does. Abuza played very well in the grand finals too. I feel like this was like his best series since NEPTUNE is coming to the team, which I don't think is exactly like, I'm not trying to criticize him when I say make that statement. It's just NEPTUNE has been playing so well, and even Nasty has had those like pop-off series where Vancouver's winning and Abuza really hasn't had to be that guy, which is what we talked about earlier in the offseason when that initial roster was formed. Like it felt like Abuza really had to be the guy on this team if Vancouver was going to see success. Now with NEPTUNE kind of coming in and just taking up space and being that star slayer right now, Abuza hasn't had to do that as much, and this was really the first time. I feel like I feel like this was his best series, the grand finals, since NEPTUNE was on the team. So that was good to see. And yeah, looking at that Atlanta series, like this is now, I said it when we talked last episode, like a dark horse just because of the way the bracket shaked out and the seeding for Vancouver heading into this event. Like I feel like Vancouver was a dark horse pick. And we got to see that rematch against FaZe. Vancouver proved it wasn't a fluke. They beat them twice now with this team. Like you said, I still do want to see this team on land. And I'm not ready to jump the gun. There was a tweet, Awakening tweeted after Vancouver's first series against Boston that obviously the majority of Vancouver's team is in Vancouver, the Pacific Northwest, and Boston's playing from Boston. They played on a Denver server, and I believe NEPTUNE is playing from Texas. So you would think that NEPTUNE would, I don't want to say have an advantage, but it feels like if he's closest to that Denver server, he might, in theory, be in an advantageous situation. And I think some people that I think for some critics and whatnot, that leads to the whole like, yeah, let's wait to see what they do online or on LAN. This is the success of Vancouver's online, yada yada. So I do think that's important to wait and see what they do at Major 2. But as of now, what we've seen in this sample size, like we've seen them beat FaZe not once but twice. We've seen them go the distance with LA Thieves in a best of 7 finals, and before they even got to that, they stomped Toronto in the previous match before the finals today. And Toronto was one of those teams, if you didn't have them like as the 3rd or 4th best team in the game before this Vancouver roster change, like they had to have been close to 4th or maybe like 5th, 6th. No matter what, they're a top 6 team in the league. I feel like that's undebatable heading into this stuff, and they've had a they haven't played the best of late in the Major 2 qualifiers and whatnot, but regardless, before the Vancouver change, Toronto was a better team than Vancouver. I don't think anyone would argue that. And Vancouver made quick work of them before the finals today. So just overall with Vancouver, I know it's been online. I know it's not a huge sample size, but what I've seen so far from this team with NEPTUNE in the roster, I really like it. And I think they have the potential if they keep on improving, and this isn't just some like honeymoon period as some people like to phrase it. I think Vancouver has a real chance to be one of the top 4 teams for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and if you want to say it's a honeymoon period, it is one of the most impressive honeymoon periods that I can remember in recent history. They are, if you're just going off of the last 3 weeks, if you had known nothing about competitive Call of Duty before this, you don't know what's going to happen after, you would come away thinking that the Vancouver Surge are the second best team in the CDL. There's no doubt about that. They beat Atlanta FaZe. They, like you talked about, they beat Toronto. LAT crushed Carolina and then had this very competitive series with Vancouver. So if you knew nothing about the CDL before this weekend, you would come away thinking that the Surge are just right below LAT, and then there's kind of a gulf between Vancouver and the rest of them. Of course, we'll see what happens. We will have to see on land, but right now they've set themselves up perfectly. I was looking up the stats while you were talking before, so this was including everything before NEPTUNE came into the roster. They had a 38.8% win percentage in hardpoint, a 40% win percentage in S&D, and a 500 or a 50% win percentage in control. Since NEPTUNE has come into the roster, they have won 77% of their hard points, 64% of their S&Ds, and they've stayed at 500 in control. They have more total hard point and S&D wins already than they did previously. So that's including all of the major 1 qualifiers, minor 1 and major 1. They already have more hardpoint and S&D wins after minor 2, which is amazing. It's a testament to the number of matches that they've already played, because they've made it so far in minor 2, where I believe they got knocked out in the first round, if I'm not mistaken, in minor 1. I mean, and those extra matches go a long way in the practice. Like, this is they get competitive matches against LAT. They get to play 7 maps against one of the best, like they're either the best team or the second best team in the league. They got 7 maps against them today. They played Atlanta in, I want to say 6 maps, or no, like 7 or 8 maps total over the last 2 weeks. They've got to play some really good teams and beat some of these good teams. I just think it's really incredible how they've managed to do this. Rambo Ray, coach of the year at this point. The roster change, we were talking about it when it wasn't official, and we were talking about, well, will it be NEPTUNE or will it be Afro, who were the 2 reported consideration players, and I didn't know either or. I was like, I don't know, and maybe Afro would have come in and had an impact similar to this, but we'll never know. But we do know that NEPTUNE is having this impact, and you can literally point to this moment where he gets added to the roster, and everything after it has been incredible for Vancouver. And they deserve a lot of credit for the work that they put in and be able to kind of turn around a season that seemed like, okay, like what are they going to do now? Like, if they're not going to get Pred or they're not going to get Hook, what is going to be? And I should say that was also something that we talked about. Well, will they add Hook instead of NEPTUNE or Afro? Yeah. And right now it's like, why would you, like, no one would take Hook over NEPTUNE, like, knowing what we know now. Like, there's no way to, ensure that everything happens the way it does with Hook, who is also a great player and proved that in the time that he played in the CDL so far this season. So I just think it's awesome. I did not expect this. I did not expect to have this long drawn out conversation about the Vancouver Surge really at any point in the season, to be honest. I just thought they were going to be one of those teams that are kind of languishing between like 6 and 12, 6 and 11, because we knew they probably weren't going to be in 12th. But yeah, I just didn't think that they were going to be one of those teams what we can legitimately talk about as like a potential major 2 championship contender. And that's really crazy. But It's such a welcome addition and welcome change for the CDL. Any last thoughts on Vancouver before we move on?
You mentioned Rambo. That made me want to go look him up on Twitter to see if he said anything. And he tweeted after the series an hour ago, GG's to Thieves, guys. Hella proud of the team regardless of the outcome. We've been progressing at a super fast rate, and this final really showed us where we're lacking and what to focus on next. And I think that last sentence there, like, obviously, it's not like any groundbreaking info or anything like that, but it's like just something to think about with this team. Like, yeah, they've played really well so far early, and they're not going to get complacent. Rambo's not going to let that happen. They know what went wrong in this series based on this tweet, and they're going to hit the lab and hit the ground running and try and get even better. So that's definitely, they have raised that bar or set the bar, however you want to look at it, in terms of, that we referred to like a roller coaster for other teams, like even OpTic last year, and like they had the highs and lows. Like, I almost said Seattle. Vancouver started that season down towards the bottom, where not necessarily towards the bottom. They weren't at this level. Make a roster change, and they have skyrocketed since then. And they do have realistically speaking, they have an opportunity to fall off a cliff here or to plateau. And I guess, making the finals and plateauing there in second place isn't the worst case. But with everything we know of Rambo in the past and everything we've seen from this team, like it sounds like they have the potential to get even better, and that's got to be a scary thought for the rest of the league.
Also, an illustration of how much has changed since they added NEPTUNE. Before they made this roster change, after Major 1, the Vancouver Surge were in 9th place with 40 CDL points. And we'll talk about the standings in totality near the end of the show, but I wanted to point this out while we're talking about Vancouver. They were in 9th place with 40 CDL points, 10 points back from the Boston Breach. Now they are in 5th place in the CDL, and tied for 5th place with 90 CDL points. They're now 20 points ahead of the Boston Breach, who are now in 9th place. And they're the way that they're playing, they very quickly and easily could catch up to Toronto, who's 30 points ahead of them, and the Carolina Royal Ravens, who I believe are 55 points ahead of them. So a really solid run to finish Major 2 qualifiers, and then at Major 2, that could go a really, really long way for Vancouver. And even if they regress back to the mean, or maybe fizzle out a little bit, it gives them a lot more breathing room for the end of the season and that race to get into the top 8. Before, they were going to be on that cusp of making champs the entire season, it seemed like. And now they have some breathing room. They're able to, hopefully for them, continue to ascend and climb into that top 4, which would be really, really crazy. Who should we talk about next? Let me pull up the bracket. I feel like we could probably group in Toronto and Carolina kind of in the same conversation, because they had identical runs. They both got, they both got a bye into the second round. They both beat a team 3-0, and then they get to the semifinals, and they themselves get 3-0'd. And I don't know, like, I think both of these teams have their issues. We've talked about that before. Toronto has not looked like the same team since the Major 1 qualifiers. They started 6-0. We started to see those cracks form at Minor 1, and it just doesn't seem like they've fully recovered. I wouldn't say like they're bad by any means, but they're just not at the, I think when they were on that winning streak, it seemed like they were going to be like a real contender for like the top 3, top 4. And like you just talked about it, a little bit ago, how you said like, they're at worst like the 6th best team in the league. And I think it's just, it shows kind of the lack of confidence that has been creeping up over the last month or so, that they're just not there yet. Carolina, I wouldn't say they're in the same boat, but they're like in an adjacent boat where they've had some really great performances. Obviously Major 1 is something to really hang their hat on, but they've been a little bit up and down. And I'm not entirely sure what to make of this minor, if anything, because I expected them to beat LAG and I expected them to lose to LAT. So there's nothing surprising. There's no surprise there. Toronto, like you could say it's surprising them to lose Vancouver, but after Vancouver beat FaZe, you're like, okay, like, if Vancouver can beat FaZe, they can beat Toronto. So what did you make of Toronto and Carolina's run at the second minor?
I mean, we can even really loop in FaZe here because, I
Okay,
mean, if
yeah.
you think about it, like Toronto and Carolina, they played 2 series and they have a 3-3 map count, like you said. Toronto or FaZe only play 1 series and they have a 2-3 map count. So I think for all 3 of those teams, like it's just this minor is hard to really make have any major takeaways for them just due to the sample size. Um, but I do think like you kind of broke it down, especially after the Vancouver upset over FaZe. Whichever way you look at it, even if you don't classify it as a quote unquote upset, which I think you have to,
Yeah,
but
it's an upset for
regardless,
sure.
The way Vancouver have been playing, like it makes sense that they were able to take down Toronto. Um, and then you kind of broke it down for Carolina too. Like, yes, expected them to beat Gentlemates. I said on the prediction show if Gentlemates or if Heretics beat Gentlemates and it was Miami versus Carolina, that match could have really gone either way just because we saw that in the losers bracket semifinals at Major One, and Miami, because Miami beat them and Miami got third, Carolina got fourth. So yeah, I think losers bracket semis. Um, and regardless of that, though, Carolina beats Gentlemates, and then they play LA Thieves. LA Thieves have dominated them all year, and so that's not really a surprise. I just think, like, especially looking at that Carolina, like that's really, going back to the roller coaster. It's not even like a really. It's more of a seesaw for Carolina in particular, just because we talked about it last show or 2 shows ago. They were 0-2 in the first week of the Major 2 qualifiers. We're sitting here talking like if they struggle in this upcoming week before the minor, they could potentially be talking about roster changes, yada yada. They go from 0-2 to 2-2 with a 2-0 week. And now, so 0-2, 2-2, and then 1-1 in the minor. Like it just seems like, like a seesaw back and forth between winning and losing right now. So, in the LA Thieves series for Carolina, like they had a chance to make something happen really in the map 2 search. Carolina was up 5-2, and they blew the lead there. But we've talked about it numerous times now on the podcast. LA Thieves have dominated Carolina, specifically in hardpoint, and just the way LA Thieves have been playing in respawns overall. Like if Carolina's choking the S&D, it's not surprising that one ended in a 3-0 fashion. So I think for all of these teams, really, even looking at Toronto, I guess. In the Vancouver series, Joe DeCease had a 0.73 and Beans had a 0.83 KD. I know we talk, I emphasize KD isn't everything, all that yada yada, but it feels like Joe DeCease and Beans really are the X factor for Toronto. I know there was that one series where we were talking at the who was it? Was it against Cloud9, I think, for Toronto, where Kleenex played really uncharacteristic to what we've come to know from Kleenex in his career from a statistical standpoint. And there were questions of the online servers and all that. So outside of that one, like Kleenex has been a pretty consistent performer. I feel like Insight, maybe not like peak Insight based on what we've seen in his career this so far, in my opinion, but he's been pretty consistent as well. It's just really like Joe DeCease had the map against LA Thieves where he dropped like 45 or something and they lost. Beans has had some pop-off maps that I know of. So it's really like, those 2 newcomers that to the team this year, when they're frying, this Toronto team is at that next level. And if they fall back and slip, then like that's why I think it's more of an X factor there for them, just in the way they perform can be real a real major X factor in terms of how Toronto play overall. Obviously, when you say like half the team is is contributing to the deciding factor, it sounds a little dumb, but not for lack of a better term. I do think Joe DeCease in particular has been an X factor for this Toronto team, and if he's struggling, it's not surprising to me that Toronto is struggling. So we'll keep an eye on that. I still think Toronto's a good team, like you said, top 6 at the minimum right now, and based on how they played early in the season. We were talking best S&D team in the game at a point, contending for third, fourth best team overall. So it's a little bit of a drop, but I still think that they're in the hunt, and they have the talent and the ability, the foundation to improve. So we'll just have to see where they go from here. But for Atlanta, Toronto, and Carolina overall, small sample size at this major. I'm not, throwing any major red flags up, or any sounding any alarms, however you want to phrase it. But I just want to see how all these teams respond to not capturing the minor. I don't. We've seen Atlanta respond obviously early this season before the first minor, where they struggled and they rattle off 12 or 13 series in a row, whatever it was. So all three teams have the potential to be contenders for championship Sunday spots. But there's only 4 championship Sunday spots, and if Vancouver and LAT are playing the way there is, somebody's going to be missing out. So it's got to be a question of who's going to keep grinding, who's going to improve from here, and all that.
The reason I separated FaZe from the other 2 teams is I think FaZe's is a lot less dire, or they're a lot less desperate, I would say, because they know that they can win at the top level. They know they can beat LAT, for example, in a grand final. So they have that confidence that they can lean on. With Carolina and Toronto, though, it does seem like, you were saying you're not panicking, so to speak. But I think, like, if you pull out the panic meter, like early on this season, I think both Toronto and Carolina, their panic meters like in the negatives. They're like, all right, we're so good, like we're doing great. And then I guess toward the end of Major 1 qualifiers, especially for Carolina, the panic meter started to register a little bit. And then there have been at points, times, I guess, for Carolina where it's gone back down a little bit. And I would say it's creeping up a little bit more. I don't know like what Carolina is thinking really, if maybe they don't see them losing to LAT as a big issue, because if you look on paper, they should lose to LAT. LAT is a better team than them. Like there's no doubt about that. Like this is how it should be, that the superior team who spent all that money, they built this super team, they should beat the Carolina Royal Ravens. That's no shade on Carolina. That's just the team that LAT put together. They should beat Carolina. But I could see the Royal Ravens, especially if they saw how great this season started. Maybe they feel like, okay, like we want to take another step up, and we feel like we're being kind of held down by the LATs of the world, so to speak. Like, we can't beat these guys. We need to make a change to beat them, or to beat those caliber of teams. I could see that happening. I don't know if that's the right move, really, but it wouldn't be out of this world to see something like that. And I think Toronto might be in that same boat too. I think both of Toronto and Carolina probably stick with these rosters through Major 2. So they finish out the qualifiers, then they go to Major 2, they see what they have. And then at that point, if they disappoint in Major 2, maybe then that is when they start to make changes or consider the changes more seriously. I don't know if either one will end up actually making a change, but it just seems like the desperation is, they're not desperate in the same way like the Boston Breach are. Like the Breach are trying to make champs, and they're like right on that edge. Toronto and Carolina are like top 4 teams at this point, especially if OpTic is going to continue to play like they are. Like they are certainly more in that conversation for the top 4 or top 3 or whatever. But like those teams, I think they're not that desperate, but I just feel like they might not be satisfied is probably the best way to put it with their recent results, and they might make a change just based on that dissatisfaction. Whereas FaZe, obviously, I don't see a change coming anytime soon. That would be just utterly ridiculous unless there was some kind of like behind the scenes drama where it's like untenable or whatever. But FaZe, I think the biggest thing for them is looking back and like, why are we losing to Vancouver? Like, what is it about the Surge that is, and like you talked about, maybe it is we're, and it's not necessarily like, oh, we're predictable or whatever, but like we like the unpredictability of other players or opponents might be throwing us off, and maybe we need to practice more against a certain type of team that kind of reflects what Vancouver is doing to make sure that we can beat that team when it comes down to it. Of course, they also have close series with LAT. So right now, like FaZe has to be looking at LAT and Vancouver as like that's our competition. We need to figure out any way we can get to beat those teams consistently. That's a lot easier said than done, though, and I'm sure LAT and Vancouver feel the exact same way about Atlanta. But yeah, I see what you're saying though, like the reason that you lump these teams together, but I think we'll see a lot about where these teams are kind of heading and what direction they're going in over the next 3 or 4 weeks, because it's going to be, especially for a team like Toronto, I'm concerned about them, like what they're really going to be like, because they do, like I mentioned, with how quickly Vancouver is racing up the standings, there's a very real chance that Vancouver will fall out of the top 4 after Major 2, and then at that point you're 5th, you're 6th, and who knows if OpTic is able to rebound, then you might keep sliding down, and at that point you do need to take a hard look and see if you want to make a change, or if you could make a change that will materially change the direction of the team. Hook is also out there, so there's always there are some players, and I'm sure there are some pretty good challengers players as well, but I'm interested to see what happens with these 3 teams moving forward. The 2 of them maybe a roster change. I don't think FaZe is doing that, but
yeah, no, and I really, just for lack of a better time to talk about FaZe, and just because we talked about the one match that FaZe played, I figured throw them in here and now we can move on.
Yeah, I think we got to talk about OpTic as a standalone though, because they stink. Like they're just bad. Like it wasn't like a blowout necessarily with Toronto. Like some of those maps were close. I believe it went to around 11 in the S&D. At the same point though, like 3-0, they get 3-0'd by Toronto. The Vegas series was, I would say, just as concerning, because they looked bad against Vegas still, and they lose S&D. They lost at control, right? It was like, what was the stat? Was this the first time that Vegas had been to around 11 in S&D or something? Like I saw some stupid stat about that.
Oh, I didn't see that. If that's true, that's crazy.
But either way, like they just did not, like we talked about it so much on the last episode and probably like the last few episodes. Like anytime you play Vegas, it's kind of the get right game. It's time to, tune up basically for Toronto, for OpTic. And they just came out so unconvincingly, and that win was like, all right, like that causes so much more concern and worry among the fan base, I'm sure, than a 3-1 win usually does. And then they go and play Toronto, they get swept. And so like literally every match except the Vegas match, they've gotten swept so far in these qualifiers, or in this stage, I guess, because this isn't part of the qualifiers. But like, yeah, they're bad. Like they came away with obviously no points, no money for this tournament, because you had to get the top 4 to get any points, and you had to get you actually had to win to get the money. So like this weekend was a wash for OpTic. I don't know if they really gained any confidence from this, because they beat Vegas as they should. Like that's more of a like, we have to do this, not like we're gonna feel really good about this. And then they came away and they lost to Toronto, who we just talked about has not been the best team, and then Toronto goes into the next match, they get swept. So like I really don't know what there is to necessarily say about OpTic and like where they are anymore. But I did look at the standings, and so after Major 1, obviously they had a really bad Major 1, and that led to a roster change. I don't know if it was directly as a result of that, but it did happen after that. They were in fifth place after Major 1. They were only 5 points back from 4th. So like really, if Toronto loses their first match of the Major 2 qualifiers, OpTic wins, they jump into 4th. Now OpTic is in 8th place. They have 85 points because they have not gained a single CDL point since that. At that point, they haven't gained any. So right now they're in 8th place. They're behind Miami, which just seems ridiculous. And it's pretty crazy because OpTic actually has 10 wins on the season, which is more than the bottom 6 or 7 teams. Like they have as many wins as Toronto and Vancouver, who are in 4th and 5th, but it's just they've really kind of crapped the bed at the worst possible times, and they're not getting the points that they probably should, or that a team of their caliber probably should. What do you think about OpTic though? Like after I don't like. I just feel as kind of bad, or I don't know what the exact word is, but it just doesn't seem like a good place to be for OpTic at this point.
So I think the one thing just overall for OpTic, that my mindset, at least before the Toronto series, um, in their post match interview against or after the Vegas match, one of the quotes Pred said in the interview is, "There's a sense of urgency, but not a sense of panic." And he went into more detail, and I haven't watched the clip since Friday, so I don't want to misquote him or anything. But just that underlying like ideology, I guess, for the team. Like, yes, they know they're, capable of hoisting a trophy at the end of the day because they did it together last year. There's still a sense of urgency in the sense they know that, shit's not going well right now and
They
they,
got to
they want to
win.
fix it. But they're not like, super panicking and like throwing stuff out the window, like trying to reinvent the wheel, however you want to phrase it. So I thought that quote was interesting. Again, this was before the Toronto series. So I don't know, how much that changes the mindset or anything for the team. Um, but breaking it down, like you said, that Vegas series was a lot closer than it probably should have been if
Mm-hmm.
OpTic is in top form. And just based on the way Vegas have played other teams, the map one, which we know at spoiler alert, I guess OpTic wins this series 3-1 against Vegas. They win 2 hard points, and Vegas is 0-21 in hard point now. Um, but before that point, the map one is 250 to 191 for OpTic, but it was like a 180 to 180 game. I wrote down in the notes through 2 full rotations of hard points, and then OpTic got almost a full 60 on the third P1 and were able to close things out after that. So that map was very close for, again, it's tough to say like OpTic hadn't won a hard point with Pred, but that's very different than Falcons not winning a hard point this entire season. Um, then we go to the search, like you said. I don't know for sure if that round 11 stats true or not, but regardless, like a round 11 in the search, I did say in the last episode, like if Falcons were going to win a map in this series, I thought they could have won a search just because, again, OpTic haven't been playing great overall, hadn't won a map, and Falcons, their best mode in my eyes is search. So like if they were able to sneak away a map when I was thinking that, OpTic clutch up in the round 11 to go up 2-0, and then just the control, a 3-0 from Vegas in the control just made no sense to me. It was a 4v10 in the round 1 on offense, and I believe like it ended up as like a 2. I don't remember the exact numbers, but Vegas were on offense on the outer zone, and they were able to cap it despite that 6-man disadvantage at the point when they had no more respawns. And then they win another offense after that, which I felt like we did see a few more offensive round wins on vault control this weekend overall, which is just a trend in control. Like it goes through periods, I feel like in different times of the season where, some maps you just see more offensive wins, which, it is what it is for control. So that was really, I was just like, wow, a 3-0. Like if you told me Falcons take a control 3-2 maybe, and like all the round wins are defense or something, and Falcons just had more ticks, and that gave them the round 5 defense, and then they were able to close down. Like I could maybe see that, but a 3-0 in the control, just wasn't expecting that whatsoever. Then OpTic almost 100-point club them in the map 4. Uh, Kenny went 29 and 19, and after all the talk about him underperforming statistically and whatnot, I felt like that was worth noting because he just needed to have a good map to kind of, silence any doubters or whatnot. But then, like you said, we go into that Toronto match, and this kind of ties back into what I was talking about earlier when we were talking about Toronto. Uh, just Joe DeCease had a really good series here, and in the map 1 in particular, Skyline Hardpoint 250, 124. Joe and Beans, Joe DeCease went 30 and 21, Beans 28 and 17. They're both leading the way. It was another 6-5 in the search, so it's, OpTic plays 2 searches in this minor, and they were both round 11s. So I guess if you want to take something away, like they didn't win both searches, but they were as close as they could have been. Regardless, Joe DeCease had one round where it was just like he had an ace, he jumped out of that window, and it was like the he could do no wrong. It was kind of crazy. And then in the control, there was like OpTic had offense in the round 5, and I don't remember exactly if that was a map like I was just saying where it was very defensively favored heading into that. I think it was. But regardless, Kenny in particular, I again wanted to give him some praise just because it would be something that probably is lost in the sauce if you're not thinking about it. But Kenny went on a 6 streak with an SMG, which I thought, brought me back a little bit to his World War II days when he was frying with an SMG. But he went on that streak to just capture the inside zone on vault control and just extend the time, but it just wasn't enough for OpTic to capture that outer zone at the end there. But yeah, I think overall, like, it's really tough to take away a ton of positives from an OpTic perspective because at the end of the day, they did beat Vegas. You just can't really take too much away from that. I feel like again, not trying to be disrespectful to Vegas. It's just, it is what it is at this point. If you don't count that win, I don't want to not count that win. I mean, I guess you technically could because OpTic doesn't get any CDL points for beating Vegas with the way the minor structure works. But just throwing that out, putting it to the side, it is what it is. It was a tune-up match, as we've talked about. They got to win, maybe got some confidence. Then they lose to Toronto, another 3-0. So with Pred in the roster, if you don't count the Vegas match, they have lost every match 3-0, and they are 0-12 in map count outside of the Falcon series. That has to be concerning. It has to change. They host Major 2 coming up here. I already talked about it last time. Like Scump basically said on the previous watch party, like, you got 4 matches left for the qualifiers. You almost have to win all 4 because of the 09 map count in the qualifiers. Like, even if you win 3 of 4, your tiebreakers from a map count perspective just probably aren't super favorable. So it's really do or die time in terms of, does OpTic want to be starting its own major in the loser bracket? And I just don't know if I've seen enough from this squad lately to be confident in saying, like, yeah, they're going to turn things around. I don't know what the answer is. I really don't think this team is going to make another roster change. It would, again, like we said, I think I said it last episode or 2 episodes ago, it would have to be a bombshell move, in my opinion. If they I don't think even like, I know people have been trying to scapegoat Kenny and blame Kenny, but like, what one player do you bring in for Kenny from challengers that completely changes things around for this OpTic team? I don't know if there's an answer, but if there's, like, again, like, in nutty land, crazy world where anything can happen, like Scrap comes to OpTic and replaces Kenny, like, yeah, that changes everything, right? So like, it would have to be a bombshell move that I just don't see happening at this point to really make OpTic consider a roster change. But I don't know. I just, the number, again, like, the fact they haven't won a map with Pred back in the roster outside of the Vegas series, that's like very eye-opening in my opinion.
I think with any roster change, I think OpTic will be very resistant to anything. Like, I don't, like, I agree with you. When they brought back Pred, it seemed like almost a statement of, like, this is our team. Like, this is who we want. Because let's be real, like, OpTic has failed on the biggest stages a lot of times, especially like at Champs is what I'm talking about. But like, when they found their first Champs roster, which is obviously their Dynasty roster, they held on as long as they possibly could for that team. They held on before then, they held on after that. They really wanted that team to have as long of a run as possible. And I feel like it's kind of the same thing with this team. Like, even with whatever happened in December where Pred leaves and they bring in Hook, like, it, I mean, they brought him back like 2 months later. So it's pretty obvious that whatever problem was, they were like, okay, we'll push it to the side. We want this team in particular. Like, we want these 4 guys to represent OpTic Texas. But I don't see them making a roster change after Major 2. Even if they, let's say they go winless in the qualifiers and then lose in the first round of Major 2. I still don't think they make a roster change until they get into the Major 3 qualifiers. If they keep losing, I think at that point they'll be like, all right, screw it. Like, we do need to make a change. And it will be Kenny because, like, let's just be real. Like, Shotzi's not the guy that they're going to drop.
Yep.
Dashy's not the guy. And I think unless there's something like personal issues or whatever with Pred, they're not going to drop him either. And Kenny's the guy that goes. Like, and that sucks because, like, we talked about it before, like, he's the guy that, you know, he's going to put the other guys ahead. Like, they're naturally going to get the higher KDs. They're going to look better. And he has not played well. Like, we should say that. Like, he just hasn't played very well. But, like, he's just going to be the guy that goes in that scenario. But I think they're going to hold on for a while. And I think it's, you know, I really could see it going into the Major 3 qualifiers. And they're still like, we're going to try to figure this out. But I think it's going to, if they continue to do this, it's going to come to a point where they're like, all right, like, no more. Like, we have to start winning. We have to make some change. And I don't even know if it will be like a bombshell at that point. I think it'll just be like, let's bring in a player that we just know is good and like can help us out like right now. I don't know who that is. I don't like, maybe they'll trade for someone. I have no idea. But like, they brought in Ghosty that one time and I was like, that's a surprising move. Like, Ghosty was not like, he was seen as like a very good challengers player and everything, but like at that time, that wasn't like a bombshell addition. He wasn't like a Hydra level talent where he was like being anticipated for like years and years. So, you know, maybe they make that kind of move where they just see a very talented player that can help them just kind of stabilize and just win some matches. I don't even know if at this point, like, it's so much about like how high is our ceiling. It's like, how about we just like make sure we raise the floor on this thing a little bit, like, so we're not just free falling. And because there's a real chance that had they not played Vegas this weekend, that they would just lost that first round matchup anyway. Like, I mean, Vegas was really the best outcome possible for them because like you could put them against anybody. Like LAG was, you know, they're the second to last team in the league. You could put them against Boston. They already lost to Boston earlier this season with Pred. And that was another point that I was going to bring up. Like, even if you want to count the Vegas win this weekend, like, just look at all the matches that they've had Pred so far this season. They're like 2-6 total. Like, they beat C9 in that one qualifier match, and then Attach went on like a rant on Twitter right afterwards saying like, this was the most stupid online match I've ever been a part of. And then obviously they beat Vegas. And like, I think they've lost every single match other than those two. And, you know, that's not impressive at all, especially for a team that literally won a world championship, you know, less than a year ago. And I don't know, like, it's weird. But again, like I talked about it before, I fully expect them to rebound at the major. Like they have been like this so many times where it seems like they can't like pull out of the skid, and then they somehow do. And I think that just goes back to the talent and working through whatever it is. But the longer it goes, then there will be the skepticism of like, what is actually wrong with you guys? Because it's not a talent thing. It's not like you guys don't have like the skill to beat these teams, but like there's a real big teamwork issue at play, and something will, you know, if they keep losing, something has to change, just because, you know, you can't just continue to bash your head against the wall and hope that it, you know, produces some kind of result, you know, try to win a major and you're barely getting out of the first round of the losers bracket. But I guess we'll see what happens with OpTic as we move forward, and, you know, they might very well start into the losers bracket of their own major, which is, you know, some teams have been there, but not typically OpTic.
Yeah. I do wanted to bring up too. I don't know if you saw the clip at the top of the notes, but I guess just tying it in overall with just the OpTic ideology right now. I saw this clip and I was really surprised. I haven't listened to it word for word since a couple days ago now. But it was basically like a podcast set up for the OpTic guys, like just talking about things. And one of the clip here is they were apparently talking about, I saw the clips on Twitter previously of like Enable and Crim6 like breaking down, I think it was a protocol hardpoint against Carolina, if I remember correctly, in the online qualifiers before this minor. and they were kind of like almost just laughing off, like, you know, people trying to, um, analyze their gameplay. And it was one, the I don't know if they actually like meant it directly about Crimsix in particular, but it was more like, it felt more of like they were saying, I think Pred joked about like, oh, Crim's Stephen A. Smith or something like that. And they said something about ESPN analysts analyzing their gameplay and whatnot. Like, they talked about podcasts and people, like Pred said something about like, oh, people I've never heard of are saying stuff about our gameplay and stuff. And I just think overall, like, that mindset is a little concerning to me. Not like that the general concept of like, let's just say in a world where Pred somehow saw our podcast here and what we're saying. If he wanted to laugh at something that we said about gameplays, like specifics, like, he has all the right to do that. I've been fully transparent this year. This is definitely the least amount of Call of Duty I played since 2009. The least since GB shut down. I haven't played like any competitive whatsoever. And even if I did, I am nowhere close to being like, an expert in actual competitive gameplay.
Yeah.
But if the guys on OpTic are seeing Crimsix, the winningest Call of Duty player ever, and Enable, who I'm pretty sure he won in Halo. I believe he did. If he didn't, he's a multi FPS professional gamer who has won titles in Call of Duty for sure. I know. If they aren't willing to, at least, again, like, those guys are retired, they aren't playing this specific Black Ops 6 game.
Yeah,
So
I
if
think
they
that's
don't
it.
want to, like, take to heart what these ex pros are saying about this specific game, like, okay, I can maybe live with that.
Mhm.
But like, if the winningest COD player of all time is saying anything about your gameplay, I feel like you at least have to take a step back and be like, maybe I should consider what this guy is saying. I'm not saying, if Crimsix is saying like they have to completely change what they're doing, and you want to be like, no, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about from this game.
Yeah.
Like, we don't want to do that. Like, yes, I could live with that. But just that notion of like comparing it to an ESPN analyst, like, dude literally won the most Call of Duty competitive events ever. He has to know somewhat on a basic level something that could translate to this game. Like, it would blow my mind if Crimsix said something that was just completely 100% off because this game is different than the games he was playing in. That would surprise me. So that was a little, I saw that clip and I was taken back by it a little bit. I was just like, again, like, if they don't want to listen to Justin Binkowski or Joe Schmo, whoever it is who hasn't done it at a pro level or any level, like, yeah, that's fine with me. But like, you got Crimsix and Enable, especially like Kenny's teamed with Enable, Dashy teamed with Crimsix. Like, it's guys they've played with at a pro level. And in Crimsix's case, nobody has won more Call of Duty events than him. If you don't want to at least consider what was being said by him from an analytical standpoint, that's a little concerning in my eyes. So I don't know if that plays into the whole like overall picture of OpTic right now. But if you tie that in, like, Karma is the one of the winningest COD players too, and he's their coach. So if they aren't willing to, at least consider what Krim is saying, how much are they taking away from Karma and what Karma is telling them on a daily basis as a coach? That's where my head went with that, and that's a little concerning to me.
Yeah, I get your point. I think there is, like, I'm not entirely sure of the context. So like,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, like, you're not even sure if they were necessarily talking about Crim specifically or Enable specifically. But like, I think there is, I hate the idea when pro players, and this is in traditional sports, where they say like, if you didn't play at our level, then you can't critique it, which is just like an idiotic thing to say, because like, you don't have to be a professional in anything, like, regardless if it's a sport or an activity, a hobby. Like, you can have legitimate and valid criticisms of something even if you are not able yourself to do what they do. Like, I should put that out there real quick. So like, we talk about it, like, obviously neither one of us are going to go pro anytime. We weren't pros in the past. We're not going to do it in the future. But I also, and both of us don't critique the gameplay like as, I guess, with a fine-tooth comb as like maybe someone like Zuma or Crimsix or other former pro players. Like they might be able to give greater detailed analysis of actual gameplay than we can. So like we try to stick to more surface level, I guess. Like we're not like diving so far deep into it. I would also, on the other hand, say like there probably is some validity to calling out former players and saying like just because you were a former player, in Crimsix's case, like one of the best ever, and a teammate of many of those players, I would say like there probably is some validity of like you do not do what we do anymore, and you don't like you're kind of overstepping your bounds of like, okay, like you're gonna say this about like certain things that we do in game, but like you have absolutely no idea of like this actual game, like this specific game. And I think like it's different with Call of Duty than most traditional sports because the game changes every single year, and there could be really drastic changes that like people on the outside or like from the viewer's perspective maybe don't realize, but a pro player certainly will know like the many differences and how severe the differences can be game to game. So I could just see from their perspective, talking about the current OpTic teams, I could see their perspective of saying like, yeah, Crim and Enable were great, but they also don't play this game and they don't know what we're going through, so on and so forth. I actually get both sides of it. I think that people should continue to criticize when they feel like it is necessary. Of course, I'd rather it be constructive and legitimate, and I feel like a lot of times it's like and this is not just based in Call of Duty, this is more like a sports media thing, and it really just a media thing in general. A lot of it is just like concern trolling and like clickbait, obviously. Like Stephen A. Smith is really bad at it. Obviously there are just a bunch of ESPN people. Obviously that was the comparison that was made, and they are very bad at it. Like where, and it's actually going on in the NBA. I don't know if you've seen this, but like like I think there's really legitimate criticisms to be had of like the NBA and the players and stuff. But I also saw LeBron's statement. And I think there's a lot of validity to what he said, is like being overly negative almost like takes away from your legitimacy. Like if you're just negative all the time about something, it's almost like that is just your personality, not necessarily your analysis or your criticism. So maybe they just see that, and I'm certain that they see a lot of negativity, especially recently, like OpTic Texas, like on the streak. I'm sure they just see that in their mentions and in their Twitch chats and YouTube videos and everything. I'm sure they see all of that, and maybe that's another part of this, is just another or two more people that should know what's going on. They see their criticism and they're like, yeah, screw those guys. Like they're piling on to this hate train that we're experiencing right now. So I understand completely what's going on here, like with both sides. I see both of their points. I don't know like what the solution is necessarily, but I think better would just be have better and more knowledgeable and more honest media members, like. And not saying like Crimsix and Enable are necessarily part of the media, so to speak, but I think that it's just a part of a greater issue, and I'm sure they see it. Like everybody piles on about Ben because Ben did not play at a high level of Call of Duty, and like he's on the flank and he's criticizing players, and then players have gone back at him like, you literally don't even play like our game, like you're not on our level, so shut up. I see both points, but man, it's entertaining, but also sad that, these guys that, I think it's just really, I don't know how to get off this point, but it just feels like there's no solution to this. It's just kind of the way media is right now, and they're experiencing it in their small bubble, talking about OpTic. So, it's difficult, but I'm sure if they win, then there's really no, there's not going to be a ton to critique, and they're going to see a lot less of this. They won't really compare or care about Crim 6 or Enable or anything. So, yeah. I don't know if you wanted to talk about any of these other teams. Obviously, we have Boston. There's nothing to say about Vegas, and then there's Minnesota, C9, Heretics, LAG. Anything on those teams? We're nearing an hour and a half in.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. We're almost at an hour and a half, so I don't want to talk too long. But I did want to bring up in particular the two first round matches on the bottom half of the bracket. Miami versus Gentlemates. This was a rematch that we saw from Lunar's debut, but obviously this time Priesta was playing in place of Skies. And last time they played, we both picked LAG, thinking the honeymoon effect with Lunar's first match was going to pay off. We were wrong then. This time around, they go in, play with Priesta in place of Skies, and we both picked Miami, and Gentlemates actually get a Game 5 win. It was their first Game 5 win of the season, too. But just in general, that's apparently a showdown now that we don't really know what to expect. I think it was probably from a Gentlemates perspective, finally getting a Game 5 win after struggling in Game 5 all season. That's got to feel good. I still am not totally convinced about the Priesta and Sky swap. I don't know how that's going to play out long term. But they were able to get a win, and then like we talked about earlier, they lose right after that to Royal Raven. So quick run for Gentlemates, but I do think it was noteworthy. They finally get a Game 5 win with their new roster of Priesta, Lunars, Kismet, and Lins. Kismet did play pretty well, and I watched the flank after on Friday. They were basically kind of like saying like Kismet in their eyes is the only player like right now who they wouldn't like. They didn't. Zuma in particular was like, I'm not going to say that all of them are. I wouldn't say Kismet is totally undroppable, but if someone's like close to undroppable status on this Gentlemates team right now, it's Kismet, and then the rest of them are
OpTic pickup Kismet?
I mean, wouldn't make sense from a role perspective, but at this point, who knows? So yeah, that was an interesting series, and then the Cloud9 Minnesota series, I said it when we talked about the first round matchups in our minor preview. I thought this was going to be the closest match of the first round ones. And I've said I thought I could see it going Game 5 just because that's been Minnesota's MO for most of the season, and it played out that way actually. Like Cloud9 win the first two maps, and then Minnesota rattle off two after that to force a Game 5. Had the potential for another reverse sweep, but Cloud9 ended up closing things out in the Game 5 search. So that was an interesting series just because I think that was one where we both realistically could have seen both teams potentially win. So it's not necessarily surprising that Cloud9 won, but it's just one that we could have seen going either way. And then, like you said, Cloud9 wins that one, and they lose to LA Thieves in the following round. I think even if Minnesota did beat Cloud9, just the way LA Thieves played this weekend overall, Minnesota probably loses to them too. But obviously that's we'll never know. That's not in the cards right now. So I just think in general, for some of these teams, it's tough to, even those teams like Toronto and Carolina, we talked about like an hour, 45 minutes ago, like they played two series. Some of these other teams only played one series. So it's a very small sample size just from this minor. But overall, I did think Cloud9 is trending in the right direction, combining this minor with their recent play in the online qualifiers. So they're another team to keep an eye on heading into the rest of these online qualifiers for Major 2, just because they were one of the teams in the bottom four for Major 1. So if Cloud9 continues to play better in the Major 2 qualifiers, then just by proxy, like another team that started in winner's bracket at Major 1 would have to drop down for them to replace them, right? So, obviously right now it looks like OpTic could be that team just because they are winless in the Major 2 qualifiers. But a lot of games to be played. We still got 2 weeks of qualifiers coming up here now, and that'll set us up for our next big tournament.
Yeah, Maz in the YouTube chat, he said, you guys, no, this was talking about Boston. Boston blow it up. And I put in the YouTube chat, I think they write it out until after Major 2. I think, he asked about if so, AR or sub change. Like I think it's really tough. Like Snoopy is, I think, pretty good about like not getting dropped here, but
Yes,
I think
100%.
any of the other three are at risk. And
I'd say Cammy.
yeah, I was debating whether like I think Purge, he's not safe necessarily, but like
Yeah,
I just don't see that being the move. I think it's gonna be Big
that's
Wake or Cammy, and I
where my
think Big
head's at.
Wake. You think Cammy? Like I mean I could see both. To be honest, their biggest issue so far has been control. Like they're just so bad at it that it's really like derailing series. Because they've lost so many game fives, and it's really like they don't win controls, which is, again, it's the least important game mode of it all. But like, if you can't win them, like they're 1-4 in the major two qualifiers and minor two, like that's really big. And they lost 3-2 to Toronto. Obviously, they lost 3-1 to Vancouver this weekend. I just don't know. Like, I mean, it doesn't seem like they're about 500 at hardpoint and S&D. It's just the control has been bad, and that's been like a theme all season long. They've just been able to like overcome it for most of the season. I don't know if they're going to be able to overcome it like consistently moving forward, but yeah, it's kind of tough for Boston right now.
Yeah, I think I would rank it. You kind of said it differently just because of Big Wake, but I would rank it in terms of like who's most likely to get dropped on a scale of most likely to not likely. I'd go Cammy, Wake, Purge, Snoopy. I feel like Purge is like that guy, like you said, he's not totally untouchable, totally safe, but he's played well enough to like, his head's above water in that regard. I just think even, again, small sample size, only one match at the minor, but and it's against Vancouver, who made it to the finals, and they played really well. But Cammy had the lowest KD in that one series. I know KD isn't everything, but Cammy's had some pretty lackluster performances all season, I feel like. So if there was I know Lunars was really that main AR name in Challengers that was thrown around a lot. So I'm not really sure, but like if they could get some other young AR player from Challengers to replace Cammy or even Big Wake, like you said, I don't see that as likely. But if they got a young gun in Challengers who's playing well, and replaced him with Cammy, I could see that, helping out. The only reason, like obviously another name we've thrown around just in general is like someone like Fellow. But we saw literally last year, like, a veteran player like Major Maniac was thrown into the
It's a tough
Boston Rock
spot.
lineup towards the end of the season, and that just didn't have an impact. And I feel like if Fellow was to join this Boston team, it would kind of like they maybe see an uptick in some search wins, which obviously that was a bigger issue for Boston last year. But I just don't know how much that would really move the needle for this particular team overall. So I don't know what the answer is for Boston.
Yeah, it's a tough position to be in, to be like Major Maniac or Fellow, and you come into a not so great situation. Obviously, Major Maniac came into like a literal house on fire, basically, and
Yeah.
Fellow, if he was the guy or anybody to come into Boston currently, it's a lot better, I guess. At the same point, I just think they probably stick it out through Major Two. I think they're like the third longest tenured roster in the CDL because everybody else pretty much made roster changes since then. Like I think FaZe obviously hasn't made the roster change, but I think everybody else has. Like even OpTic made a change. So like Boston, I think you just kind of try to bank on like this chemistry overriding like a pretty bad recent form. But even then, like they've shown some glimpses. I just don't know. Like there's really also not very many moves that they can make that would seem like pretty apparent. Pick 'em so far this season. We both went 7-4 at minor two. We basically picked the same teams other than like 2 or 3 matches this weekend. So really nothing's changed. You're 66-37 on the season. I'm 59-44 on the season. And I looked it up. It was not Vegas's first time in a round 11. It was their first 3-0 in control, which seems much more plausible.
Yes.
So that was according to Crone on Twitter. So yeah, that does it for the show. We appreciate you guys listening and watching. Obviously, a little bit longer of a show. We've kind of done an hour and a half more recently, but it's really like these are some of the longer episodes typically. because we're trying to talk about every team. And even then, like today, we did not really get to talk about like 5 of these teams very in depth. Actually 4. I'm not like, we're never going to talk about Vegas super in depth, I don't think. But we do appreciate you guys tuning in. Make sure to subscribe, like, or follow the podcast wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music. If you just search up Ego Chall Podcast on YouTube, you should be able to find it. I believe we're over 210 subscribers now on YouTube. We're trying to get to 300 by the end of the CDL season. If you want to watch these shows live, you can do so on YouTube, or you could go to twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. And while you're on Twitch, you might as well go over to twitch.tv/jbink. That's JBINKK. He is streaming. This was more than 50 days in a row, if I'm not mistaken. And if he plays League of Legends, so make sure to give him a follow on Twitch. You can also follow both of us on Twitter at JBank with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast store is at Ego Chall Podcast. And we will be back on Wednesday, March 5th. Like I said, I think on last episode, maybe 2 episodes ago now, but so we're going to do the live show on Wednesday night, and then the podcast will be in your feeds Thursday morning. We will very likely not be doing a show on Sunday, so on the 9th next weekend after the matches. So we'll probably break down everything next Wednesday, which will be the 12th. I'm going out of town for work, so I'm not going to be able to stream or able to do the podcast next weekend, but we will certainly catch back up and talk about the matches and then preview the second weekend matches and all of that stuff when we get back together. So we appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate Maz for checking out the stream and chatting in the YouTube chat. And that about does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support. Like we, talked about the minor for a while now, but this is just an online tournament, really. And we got some more online matches to go before we're back on land, but a lot of things to keep an eye on narrative wise, whether it's the rise of Vancouver or just OpTic in general. If you want to see how FaZe are going to react to another loss to Vancouver, or if LAT are going to keep on improving from here. A lot of things to keep an eye on and a lot of things to be excited about, even though that we're still got a couple online matches to go before the big Major 2 OpTic event. So yeah, hope you guys stick with us, enjoy the content, and we'll be here when we can to break it all down for you. So thanks as always, and remember to send the chat.